All right, let's spend a little time on fluids and electrolytes. This is chapter 31 in the first edition of Super Simple Anatomy and Physiology. Chapter 31, really important, talks about the two fluid compartments. We're about 2/3 fluid, water, and there's an intracellular fluid compartment and an extracellular fluid compartment. Makes sense. The cell is the structural and functional unit of the human body. About 2/3 of our fluids are inside the cells, 1/3 outside the cells, and as the rule of two would have you guess, there are two subdivisions to that extracellular compartment, and that's interstitial fluid, fluid located in between the cells. So if you look at a brick wall, and the bricks are cells, the mortar in between the bricks is where the interstitial fluid compartment is. And then there's an intravascular fluid compartment that contains the plasma. And on page 310 in Super Simple, you can see there is a diagram that's the rule of thirds for fluid compartments. You can see that darker blue. That's intracellular. And then extracellular divided into an interstitial and an intravascular space. And water moves based on osmotic pressure, that is from higher to lower water concentration, which is driven primarily by solute concentration, osmotically active solutes, like salt and glucose or sugar are the two that really need to be focused on by novice students starting to build their foundation of understanding in an introductory A&P course. So where there's a higher solute concentration, water wants to move in that direction. Where there's a hypotonic solution that is less than the 0.9% concentration in red cells of salt, or the 5% concentration of glucose, then water will move in the direction of the solute concentration. So if it's in a hypotonic solution, it'll go from the solution into the cells, causing the cells to swell. If there's a hypertonic solution, it'll go out of the cells into the area of concentration of osmotically active solute. Summarized super simply as the fact that conceptually, figuratively, osmotically active solutes like salt and glucose suck. It's really the water osmosing, but you can think of it conceptually as the water sucking fluid toward it. You need to be aware of the ways that we get fluid in, and there are two basic ways that we get fluid in. And that's drink and food. That's figure 31.3 on page 312, first edition of Super Simple. And fluid output includes four different types of fluid output. Obligatory, which is loss of water that always occurs. It's recurring regardless of hydration. It's the water vapor we breathe out that we excrete or secrete from our skin in sweat. Then there's facultative, F-A-C-U-L-T-A, TIV, which is controlled water loss, and it's hormonally regulated. One of the primary hormones is ADH, anti-diuretic hormone, produced by the hypothalamus, stored and released from the posterior pituitary, which is endocrine. You might go back and review endocrine about ADH, anti-diuretic hormone. Then there's sensible water loss, which is measurable, the water that we lose in urine and in the feces, and insensible water loss, not measurable. So that's, again, like the obligatory loss through breathing, water vapor in our breath, and sweating. So sweating and respiration. Then with fluid and electrolytes, you also need to be concerned about acid-base balance. Remember, 7.35 to 7.45 is the normal range of pH, fairly normal range in the body and in plasma. And the body has chemical buffer systems, balancing systems, and also physiological balancing systems to help maintain that. And then the chemical ones are phosphate buffering. I'm on page 313 in Super Simple First Edition, that buffers within the cells. That's phosphate buffering. There's protein buffering, occurs both within the cells and in the blood, and primarily the chemical system, that buffer system that you really need to be focused on is bicarbonate buffers with this formula. CO2, carbon dioxide, plus water yields H2CO3, that's carbonic acid, which will break down into bicarbonate, HCO3 minus, an anion, and a cation, hydrogen ion, which of course hydrogen ion concentration is what determines acidity. So those are chemical buffering systems. And then you have two physiological buffering systems, a respiratory buffering system, which again, in blowing off CO2, involves this formula. It's a really important formula. It needs to spend some time understanding it. And urinary buffering system, where the kidneys can urinate away, pee away hydrogen ions, or hold on to hydrogen ions if there's an alkalosis and they need to decrease the pH or increase the acidity. Or bicarbonate can excrete or retain bicarbonate. And that will result in two types of imbalances, or it will overcome two types of imbalances in the body. Metabolic, either an acidosis or an alkalosis, either metabolic or respiratory. So a metabolic acidosis would be caused by something like ketoacidosis, overproduction of ketone bodies in somebody who has diabetes and they're in ketoacidosis, so their blood sugar levels are too high because of a lack of insulin, or a metabolic alkalosis, loss of hydrogen ions by excessive vomiting, excessive gastric suctioning in an inpatient setting can create a metabolic alkalosis. Emphysema, chronic bronchitis, COPDs, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, where CO2 over on this side, CO2 accumulates. Increased levels of CO2 drives this formula from the CO2 to the hydrogen ion, increases hydrogen ion concentration, and causes a respiratory acidosis or hyperventilation from excessive anxiety, for instance, or high altitude. That can blow off CO2. So the CO2 is going down, and that's going to pull this formula that way, which is going to decrease hydrogen ions, and you'll end up with a respiratory alkalosis. Complex concepts. It's not expected that a novice student at an introductory level is going to really understand these in depth and be confidently comfortable. What you need to do is start to develop an understanding of acid-base balance, the body's ability to buffer and maintain that 7.35 to 7.45 range of acidity, pH range, normal acidity. If it goes below that pH, below 7.35, it's going to be an acidosis, either respiratory or metabolic, depending on the etiology or the cause of that acidosis. If it goes above the 7.45, it's an alkalosis, either a respiratory or a metabolic alkalosis. Spend a little time with that. Be patient with yourself, though. It's going to be confusing. You're going to need to go out online, look at some animations, do some additional readings. It's explained fairly well in a super simplistic manner in the first edition of Super Simple Anatomy and Physiology. So that's fluid and electrolyte balance and acid-base balance. Really important, especially in a critical care kind of environment, in an ICU environment. Okay, that's it. I'll see you next time. Until then, Kraus out.